Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, Episode 201.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Today I have with me Nigel Bowden, right?
That's correct.
And you're in the UK. Nice sunny day there. You've been out running today?
No, I'm having a little bit of a break today. I've been out most days, but just having a little bit of a break. Don't want to overdo it. Not at my age, anyway.
Not overdo it yet. You're a youngster. I thought I'd get you on the podcast today and talk about your podcast / training / I don't know even how you put it in a category, your Wi-Fi for beginners.
I've decided to put it together as a sort of limited series podcast, really. It's delivered over an RSS feed and it's on iTunes, that sort of thing. But I thought if I just do a limited series podcast, like I say, it's like a sort of mini training course, really, just to get people going on the basics of Wi-Fi theory.
So why did you use the podcast as the delivery mechanism rather than some other training delivery service?
It's quite interesting, really, because it's obviously been a few years since I put this together, but I was going through a stage of listening to lots of podcasts while I was doing lots of traveling. So when I was driving in the car, train journeys, things like that. And funny enough, I was sort of consuming a lot of technical content, and one of your early podcasts was sort of one of my favorites, really. I remember hearing you appearing on, I think it was on a Cliff Ravenscroft podcast. He was the podcast answer man, and you appeared there, and you were putting out all this great content. And I was consuming, all of this technical information, really enjoying it. And I thought I'd really sort of like to do that myself one day. And then when I had this idea of trying to put the podcast or some sort of training package together, I thought podcasting would be a great way for me to be able to deliver it in a fairly easy way, but also people will be able to consume it on the move if they're just driving to work or maybe on a flight or, taking a train journey. It's just a nice way to sit there, just listen to some information and then absorb it in a fairly sort of easy way that they don't have to invest too much time reading books, things like that.
As the podcast or course developed, what kind of hardware did you need to put together for your first podcast recording?
It was all very low tech, to be honest. I think I just bought myself a USB mic and experimented with learning how to use Audacity to do some recording, and sort of struggled through understanding how to edit audio, but sort of managed to pull it together. And then you have to figure out how to, put it all into an RSS feed, etc., and build a website around it. It was a bit of a learning curve, but it was very interesting. And I really enjoyed doing it, to be honest.
Everyone can hit this by going to wififorbeginners.com, beginners with an S. wififorbeginners.com. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. You can also find it on iTunes, and you have a separate RSS link as well.
Yep.
And all of those you can find on that website.
You can subscribe by going to from the iTunes podcast application, and also, like you say, visit the iTunes store. And I've actually put the episodes onto YouTube as well now, because some people like to listen to audio on YouTube, so I've transferred them there as well. So if you want to subscribe to the playlist, if you search for Wi-Fi Nigel in YouTube, you can subscribe to the playlist and get all the episodes if you'd prefer to consume it that way.
And you do have matching slide decks to go with them for each of the modules.
So what I decided to do was just sort of break the content down into a number of modules, to try and give it a little bit of structure. The main aim of doing it was to try and give people an audio-only set of content that they could consume on the move. But there were still a few topics which are quite difficult to explain audio only. So I've for each of the modules that I broke it down into, I created a set of slides as well. They're just a set of PDF slides. So the idea was you could actually go to my website, download the slides, and then when you're sort of sitting on the train or whatever, you can be listening, and if needs be, maybe just fire up the slide deck and have a look at one or two diagrams that I talked about during the actual podcast itself.
What was the chunks? You have different what, 21 or something different?
I tried to sort of break it down into the sort of main areas that I found people who were just starting out with Wi-Fi networking were having a few problems with them. I mean, the background to this was that I've met a lot of people in my work who were really good network engineers, or they maybe network administrator maintaining big networks, and they've got a lot of expertise on routing and switching and security, but they were having to try and carve a little bit of a path into Wi-Fi as well, and they were maybe struggling to get a grip of it. They'd maybe attend a vendor course, something like that, and understand how to drive the equipment for a specific vendor, the wireless equipment, but they would really not get any of the basic RF type theory, understanding the 802.11 standard. And so I really wanted to get all of those areas, subject areas where people weren't getting the depth of detail, and give them a nice gentle introduction so that they could then go away and maybe start looking at things like the CWMP books, the CWNI study guide, things like that, which out of the gate is quite daunting. I mean, it's a big thick book. It's got lots of really heavy theory in there, fantastic reference resource, but for a beginner maybe a little bit overwhelming. And so I basically broke it down into 6 modules. So I basically started off in the first one just looking at what do we mean by a Wi-Fi network, talking about things like 802.11 and the various components in a wireless network. Then the second module takes a look at the RF characteristics that we need to be aware of, things like what do we mean by RF signals, looking at RF spectrum, concepts such as coverage and modulation. Moved on to a third module where we started to look at the actual some of the main components for Wi-Fi network. So in module 3, we looked at access points and talking about what they look like, how you would install them, what they actually do in a Wi-Fi network. Then in module 4, moved on to a little bit more in depth, talking about various RF principles. So we revisited RF, started looking at things like what do we mean by half duplex transmissions and CSMA, CA, things like that. Then in the 5th module, moved on again to another major component in a wireless network, which is Wi-Fi clients, and started to have a look at what the component parts were, talking about the fact they've got radios in there and antennas, things like this, and started to dive even deeper into the 802.11 standard. And then in module 6, started to look at the wireless infrastructure components, things like wireless controllers, and talking about things like the management control and data planes. So trying to give a sort of fairly rounded, but not too detailed or overwhelming approach or coverage of the topics that you need to know to get you going in Wi-Fi network.
Well, I did notice that of the 19 separate recordings, they're all available in MP3 as well if you wanted just to download them. There's 6 of the 19. A third of it is all about Wi-Fi clients. Why the focus on clients? Just a general question, then we'll come back to this specific.
Once you start diving into clients, I needed to actually introduce a few more details around 802.11 itself. So when you start talking about the capabilities, you then also have to talk about things like 11R, 11K, and the more detail of the capabilities that a client may have. It's a big topic. I mean, that's the area really that seems to cause the most problems when you're trying to design a wireless network, because of the various idiosyncrasies of them and different capabilities that they've got. So it was just a big topic. It needed a lot of attention.
I totally agree. I mean, if you just think of just by count, if you're running a really dense network with lots of APs, you might have a 10 client to 1 AP ratio. Sometimes you're up to the 20 or 30 clients to AP ratio. So just by count, we have lots more clients to deal with than we do APs. And APs are usually, if you're a Cisco shop, they're all Ciscos.
Yeah.
Whereas clients are all over the map. So I was supporting it. It's a good idea to have that. Well, you did these back in the end of 2015 and spring of 2016. Mm-hmm. How much has changed since then?
There's been some developments for sure. Obviously, we've got 11AX and we've got the whole business about 6 gig being on the horizon. So things have certainly moved on. But looking back at the slide decks, in anticipation of doing this podcast, I was quite surprised, really. A lot of the base material, the foundations that you need to build on, it never really changes. The RF and the 802.11 standard. The vast majority of the principles and theory that you need has changed very little. It is incremental additions. since then. But yeah, certainly 6 gig is a big one that's going to be missing from there, and that's going to be something that's going to become more important over the next year or two as that becomes approved for use in different countries.
I agree with you. The fundamentals, the things the RF pieces, how antennas work, and basically how most 802.11 works hasn't changed literally in 2 decades.
Yeah.
The pieces are still there. I was just teaching a class the other day, and nearly 20 years ago, I made the first graphic that had the green diamond that I talk about on it. It was a page that had where a client has to associate to an AP, and we wanted to show that it was a decision. So decision in a flowchart is a diamond. And since the graphic artist already used a bunch of other colors, we decided to paint it green. And the picture even has a graphic of a laptop with a PCMCI card plugged in. That tells you how old it was. And I was using that the other day, and somebody asked and said, "Why does your laptop have that little thing sticking out?" And they had never even seen. I mean, they were that young. They were probably not even born then. When they saw that, I explained it to them. They go, "Oh, really? You had to stick stuff in?" But that concept of a client making the decision of which AP to join, still same thing. So even though this might be 5 years old, it's still the same way that stuff works today. And we don't even have 6 gig clients or 6 gig APs today. So you still have some time before you have to update.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to give that some thought.
So any thought of updating it to add, we probably had AC since then, at least wave 2 of it.
Yeah, we were in the midst of 11 AC back then. So I think I would definitely like to revisit some parts of it and refresh the content. And especially, people must be wondering, well, what about 11AX? How does that change things? What's that going to look like in the future?
Right now, my question is, does it work? Most people I know can't even when we tried. We just had a deep dive, a 5-hour deep dive at WLPC in February. And Peter also gave a presentation in Prague as well, Peter McKenzie, where we're trying to take 802.11ax AP and actually prove that it's doing the things that it's supposed to do and can't get it to work. Using there's not like a lot of clients anyway, but we found clients that could work, that could connect, but they didn't use the AX functions.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hype still, I think.
Yeah. I must admit there's some great sounding features in there, but the proof will be in the pudding really over time. Interestingly, I attended one of Devin's wireless adjuster courses recently, and he's got these various principles of design that he currently adopts, and one of them is to turn off the 11AX features because they are still so variable, shall we say.
Stability is always a good thing when you're doing testing. Yeah, so I don't know where that's going to be. I put out a challenge a little while ago to my friends who work for vendors and said, "Hey, can you show me BSS coloring working? I don't even care if it's in a lab. Can you just show that it works?" And no one's come back with a yes on that one yet. So there's some features I think that are in AX that are, the complexity over the last 2 decades has just got more and more and more complex. There's some pretty fancy things going on, but can we actually get them to work?
Yeah, I'd be very interested to see if OFDMA actually delivers. That does sound very promising, especially when you're talking about real-time clients, voice type clients. If that could deliver, that could be very interesting.
Yeah, because they don't need very much at all. They just need to be consistent. You also did a little test. It's actually one of my favorite things I've done in a long time. And you did it very precise in taking a client and moving it mere inches to see what the differences are. Can you tell us about that little experiment you set up?
Yeah, I did a blog post about it, and basically I think this was just a Samsung S7 phone, the phone that I'm using at the moment, and set up a test access point in my house. I got a line of sight about 5 meters away, and I set up this phone and I put it on a little turntable. And I think it was propped up at about a 45-degree angle. I put the client on this little turntable on a table and took RSSI measurements. And what I did, I actually rotated it through 360 degrees in a horizontal plane. and every 45 degrees took the RSSI measurement. It was amazing, really, just turning the phone through a few degrees and altering its its position or its orientation to the access points had incredible impact on the RSSI values. Literally, you could turn it in some positions through 45 degrees and get maybe a 10 dB loss. It was incredible. I would never have believed that you could have such a huge variation from a tiny movement in the client itself. I've always suspected it. I mean, I think people like yourself have always said, you only have to move a client a few inches when you're taking wall loss readings and things like that, and you're going to see quite a huge variation. So you need to average these things out. But to have it in a static position and just rotate it, it's an incredible experiment.
We'll add it in the show notes as well, because it's actually a really good blog post. And I think people need to do that experiment on their own with their own gear. And then they'll see, oh, wow, it actually did. It's the 6-inch square challenge.
That's the one. Yeah. Yeah. Because I basically drew out a 6-inch square on the table and moved the client to the 4 points, the 4, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest points of the square. And even just moving it through 6 inches and doing the orientation, just got a huge variation of results, which is amazing. But when you consider the implication for doing a Wi-Fi design when we're walking around, just getting, measuring beacon measurements with Sidekick or whatever, and trying to do a rough offset, the variations that your actual clients are going to experience is immense, and you need to factor that in.
And then there's the variation within clients. I was stuck in on a super rainy day in Jakarta once over a weekend. I had nothing to do, so I had a bunch of, I was teaching a class, so I had a whole bunch of NIC 300s, the 8494s from Proxim. So I thought, well, today's a good day, got nothing else to do, let me test them. So I had a 7-port USB hub with me, so I thought I'll test all 7 at the same time. So I put an AP like you did, 5 meters away, plugged them all in, and because I was using Ekahau, I could control them to listen on one channel only. By turning off all the other channels, they didn't try to change channels. They would just sit there, and every 1/10 of a second, they would grab another piece of data. And then I could plot the data out, and it's very precise. Well, doing that, the first time I had them all in the hub at the same time, they were wildly different. And then I thought, oh, wow, maybe it is because of the position in the hub. The hub, maybe they're a centimeter apart, maybe a little more than that.
Yeah.
Maybe that would matter. So then I rotated them from position 1 to position 7 and did them backwards, left the hub in the same place, actually ended up taping it to the desk so it wouldn't move, and then found I got the opposite results. So it was actually the devices that were different, not specifically position. But to even put position out of it, I only tested one at a time in one slot, taped down so there was no movement, and then tested 15 NICs. And what I found was a wide variation. Like the highest was probably a 7 or an 8 dB differential. Same NIC, same orientation, same physical location, same AP, and it was just swapping out NICs. So even within same brand, same type, we have a variation. And then you add to that your 6-inch challenge, and you now have some pretty wild, crazy answers. And then we're supposed to design so they all work.
It doesn't bear thinking about. Yeah. Yeah. How do you design for that?
It's part art, part science, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And then we go out and we try to fix it all after the fact. So you want to give us some places where people can go to, if they wanted to listen in and, they have some spare time during this COVID crisis thing, to go back through your Wi-Fi for beginners?
Yeah. If you go to wififorbeginners.com, you can also go to my own blog, which is just wifinigel.com, and there's a link there to the website. And as I say, you could get onto YouTube as well now. If you do a search for Wi-Fi for beginners, there's a good chance it'll come up in the search listings there as well. So a few places you can get hold of it, and also the iTunes podcast app, you should be able to get it there as well.
Any new things that we should be looking forward to on your upcoming blogs? What's the thing you're just thinking of? Oh, maybe I should do this next.
I am very heavily into the WLAN Pi at the moment, as you may know, and I never sort of tire of playing with that, and I'm looking at I've been inspired by Devin's recent classes of using remote probes or using the WLAN Pi as a remote probe for things like Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi Explorer. And I'm quite interested in playing around with remote sort of VPN access for that, so you can get through firewalls and things like that. And I've been looking at a few packages there. So when I've sort of got all the details around that, I'm probably going to blog on that. And also Peter McKenzie has got me interested in 802.15.4. He did a talk at WLPC in Prague, and he was talking about BLE, and I'm quite interested in BLE at the moment. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in location tracking solutions potentially, and so I want to know a little bit more about that. So I'm having a little bit of a play with packet analysis on that, and maybe do some blogging on that potentially.
That would be good. Oh, by the way, there's Adrian's Wi-Fi Explorer Pro also can access a 802.11.15 little NIC.
Yes, I've not had a chance to play with that.
I shipped a couple over to Nick Turner, so if you want to pick one up, you might want to hit up Nick for a little bit and see if you could get one of those to play with, because it's just a different way of getting the same data in.
Okay.
And it's the same one that Peter used at Prague last year.
Okay, excellent.
Well, Nigel, thanks for taking your time to share your expertise with us, and glad to get out there and get more people in, trying out your Wi-Fi for beginners and bring them along.
Okay, thanks very much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.